So, because you brought it up, I want to go there a little bit more about folks who are not in the binary masculine and feminine, right? And so, what does that do? What kind of risk does that place? What kind of burden does that place on our queer and gender nonconforming members of our communities and our families, particularly around either healthy, how it could be supportive, or not so healthy aspects, notions of masculinity?
First I'll say that, I was lucky enough as a young boy, growing up in a family that was very supportive and loving. My father was my best friend. And I spent so much time with my dad growing up. We shared a love of sport and a love of family and spent a lot of time together. But he was a great role model for me when it came to understanding what it meant to be a man. Because he wasn't afraid to cry. He was loving, respectful, and that was a great example for me to follow. And I've tried to do that my whole life as a result of what my father's example was for me. So, one of the things my dad used to always say to me is that when they're your children, it doesn't matter, you have to love them. Love them for who they are. Don't try to change them. Try to love them for who they are, because you helped make them. So I have a gay son, and my son John Paul has had, he's identified with a female gender early in his life. I have a picture dropping him off at daycare when he was in like a cheerleading outfit with a pom-pom. He's about 3 years old. And I'm kneeling, and he's next to me, and we're both smiling, and he knows that I love him. So my son's always known that I've loved him. And so my wife is white. The kids are very light-skinned. They look white to everybody that would not know. And so, here I am walking into school in daycare with him grabbing my finger, and he's got his skirt on and stuff, and we're walking to school, and he's got this shock of blonde hair, and here I am as a black male, and that's my son. That's all that mattered. That I'm his protector, I'm his father, I put him on this earth with his mother, and he's going to be whoever he's going to be, and we're going to support him and love him. And that's what he needed. And now he's a happy adult, 24 years old, and he's knocking them dead in New York, chasing his dream. And he likes who he is. And that's our job as parents, is to raise healthy, happy, productive adults. No matter what kind of person they might be compared to what your expectation or somebody else's expectation might have been. So the most important job I've ever done is being a parent and being a loving husband and father. And I got that from the example that my father and mother set for me. They separated when I was 11 years old. And yet my mother and father made sure that they stayed civil towards each other, loving towards each other. They just couldn't live together anymore. Every birthday, every holiday, whatever I needed, my father was there. He was always with us eating meals or whatever. So this goes back to show you about the example that people set and how it impacts you for the rest of your life. And so that's what I've been committed to, is wanting to set that example, not only for the student athletes at Northeastern or other places around the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but for my own family. That's the most important work I can do.
Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
Very powerful.
I think I want to be closer friends with Peter.
Right?
Me
too.
He's just that kind of dude, and so is Craig. All right.
Wait, do men pat each other?
Yeah,
like
yeah. So, just like I really hate to speak on behalf of women because I'm not a woman, I'm a man. I really hate to speak on behalf of gay men because I'm not a gay man. I'm a heterosexual man. The only thing that I can say is that when I first started doing this work, and I don't know if any of you experienced this, I know I did. Now I'll be very honest and very vulnerable with you right here in this space. When Jackson Katz first approached me about doing, speaking out against violence against women, and, you know, all forms of gender-based violence, I was terrified. I was terrified to do it, and I was terrified because of how other men were going to view me. My ex-teammates, number one. My fraternity brothers, number two. My own father, my uncles, right? The men in my life, the presumably straight men in my life, how were they going to look at me? Were their views about me going to change if they knew, or when they found out, that I was an anti-sexist activist, right? Or that I was speaking in support of women's issues. And so that fear of being called gay speaks volumes, doesn't it?
For real.
And when I travel around the country and I do that box exercise, and we talk about the words that go outside of the box, the words that boys and men are called, if they're not trapped inside and conforming to limiting and narrow constructions of masculinity, the words that go outside the box, they're homophobic, right? They're anti-women, anti-girl. And so I can't imagine the courage that it must take to actually live outside that box, to be outside that box, to authentically and courageously be who you really are in spite of the negative pushback or consequences that you may receive for being anything other than heterosexual or male. That has to be very challenging. So I applaud anyone who has the courage to be their authentic selves in the face of that, because I know that it would be very challenging, very difficult for me to do so.
Thank you for your honesty.
Sure. Very strong words for both of you. You know, if I've not learned anything else in these years, is to be humble. You know, I don't know much, is what it comes down to sometimes. You know, I need to be shown and taught. And this fear-driven process here, like, you know, I'm a straight guy, I've got a lot to lose. You know, my position, what I look like, how to be, and I got to prove who I am. I can't just sit here in this chair and be a real man. I've got to prove it, go prove it. So that is something really, that's kind of what we're working to get away from. Where's the leadership of how to get away from it? Well, that's what's going on with the rest, you know, with folks, with queer folks saying, we're going to show you. And this is a place you can go that's actually pretty happy. And you don't be too terribly afraid of it. That's leadership, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great comments. So thank you for your just vulnerability, honesty. I just want to pause and say that. It's pretty amazing, so thank you. So people, all these folks have come in here to learn, to dialogue, and they're, you know, opening our minds and hearts. So this is a time for you, from your experiences, to kind of share, what do you recommend folks take away from today? What recommendations around what they can do, next steps? You started to talk about it, Craig, but where do we go from here? What do folks take with them? We want action. Go down to Peter, come back, yeah. Next.
Well, one of the things that I've always said in any kind of leadership development environments that I've been in, that I've never really distinguished between my professional life and my personal life in terms of what I do and who I am. And what I've always meant by that is that if you know, I have to live my values in everything that I do, and that my values in my professional life can't be different than my values in my personal life. And that's always been one of the frustrations for me as I see examples of people in leadership who have disappointed and failed. And you know, the first thing that they do many times is they want to apologize to their family. You know, and they want to make sure that they tell their family how much they love them and how sorry they are. And you know, that's, for me, like, that's the first thing I think about, is that I don't ever want to embarrass or let my family down, because that would be more hurtful than any position that I could lose. You know, I don't want my daughter to look at me and think that all the things that I tried to teach her, that I was lying to her all this time. That would break my heart. And so if I have expectations for people at work in terms of living a life of integrity and respect and the appreciation of difference in all its forms, then I have to live that every day at work, but also at home. So my relationships with my children, my relationships with my wife, my relationships with my siblings, my mother, my father when he was alive, they all have to be consistent. And so the same way that I would want to treat my own family is the way I try to treat my colleagues. And part of that is that if my children are doing things that they're not supposed to do, I'm going to hold them accountable because I want them to learn. And it's the same thing that I would do at work. So I'm trying to live my values. I'm trying to be a living example of what my expectations for others are. And I don't have a problem with people calling me out if I don't live up to it, because I want to know when I'm failing so I can do better. So the first thing that we all have to do when we leave here is let's just try to commit ourselves to living life a certain way. You know? And that means being kind to people and being respectful and trying to engender trust. You know, it's like every day these things are coming up about sexual assaults, and I keep asking my wife, why are people treating people that way? When did that become okay? You know? Why can't we just be respectful when we're working with someone of the opposite sex, and we don't need to look at them as a sexual object, but as a colleague who deserves our respect, that we're trying to work together, that they have their own family and their own insecurities, and we don't need to play on those. You know, so the first thing we need to do is live a life of example, not be afraid to hold our colleagues and our families accountable, encourage people to hold us accountable so that we can do things the right way. And you know, I've been reading a lot of books lately for some of the classes I've been teaching. And it's amazing to me how so much of the scandal that's been happening in collegiate athletics in particular has come about because people weren't willing to speak truth to power. They were so worried about the brand or the legacy of a particular program or an institution that they stayed silent. So all the stuff that happened at Baylor with all the sexual assaults and rapes on the football team at a Baptist institution,
Quote unquote.
Right.
quote unquote, that's supposed to be driven by a higher calling, failed the people at their institution, risked safety because they were trying to protect a stupid football program. And the same thing can be said about Penn State. The molestation of children, you're going to stay silent when you have 18 great grandchildren and grandchildren? How can that be? Where's the disconnect there? And the University of North Carolina with all the academic fraud, people knew for a long time that things were going on that weren't supposed to be going on just to allow those athletes to continue to be eligible so that they could play for North Carolina, because North Carolina was, you know, the athletics program was so big and so great, and they didn't want to do anything to bring it down. Well, shame on them. Shame on them. It's all about values, and our values have to be of conviction and not of convenience.
All right, don't get Peter all riled up now. Okay. Go ahead, go on.
I'll try and
Thank you.
be as brief as possible.
No, it's all right, go.
I don't know everyone in this room, but I'm assuming that everyone in here, in this room right now, has varying levels of experience, varying levels of confidence, various levels of understanding about these issues, and varying levels of passion about these issues, and maybe even varying levels of ideas about how to change some of what we're talking about. I would hope that everyone in this room really believes that they are more powerful than you think that you are. To believe that you have more power inside of you than you believe that you actually do. So even at your most powerfulest, right, for the people who are really, really super confident in their power, you have more power, right? even people who are struggling with their confidence, right? You have more power than you can possibly imagine. And I would ask you, and I'm sure everyone at JDI would ask you, to tap into that power to create social change. That you have the ability, you have the gifts, you have the intelligence, you have the desire, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room. And I would implore you and encourage you to walk out of this room feeling inspired and hopeful and motivated and feeling like you can change the world, because that's the only way that we're going to create change. We have to believe that the world as we know it can and will change.
All right now. All right now.
Wonderful. I am thinking about next steps. And when we come to conferences, we're wondering, what do I take away? And what's my next step? And there's usually some one thing. And that some one thing is what I'm looking for. This I can do, or I can take away. And he's looking for that one thing that you can follow up on tomorrow and take that step. Big piece of what I feel in a place like this is connecting and connection, and the strength in numbers has been mentioned, and that the business of inviting someone to join you is very powerful. And I hope you think about inviting someone to join you tomorrow in this.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much. Just want to end, thank you so much. Just want to end with a one word, again on that brevity, with a one word. What's the future of the Engaging Men and Boys work? What's the future of this? How do we go from a campaign, a White Ribbon Day, a pledge, to a movement? All that in one word. Can you do that one more? Just saying, just try.
Courage.
Courage. All right, courage.
Transformation.
Ooh, boom.
Education.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking these three amazing men, these three amazing brothers of mine, three amazing brothers. Thank you so much. Amazing. Feel free to do some more man hugs out there. You want to practice one more man hug, find somebody, ask them consent, give them a hug.
We'll do a selfie.
Okay, there you go. Selfie.
Do a selfie.
And also,
You guys are too tall for me. Thanks. I'll do a selfie with the audience so you don't get jealous. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today and for all the work that you're doing to make a difference in your communities. Thanks so much. There's questions?
Oh, yeah.
Questions? We have a few minutes, don't we?
We can add a few minutes. That's fine. Do you want to read them?
She's
I
going to read
didn't
it.
do Q&A because I thought we were at the end. Come back! Come back! Come back! Come back! Not done.
Sorry, we still have a few minutes. We can
Okay,
probably
cool.
add a few questions.
Cool.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is, on the outside, men who abuse look like abuse of power and privilege. But what's happening deep inside these men? Pain and shame? Question. What's happening underneath what we see on the outside?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I think maybe for some, it's what they've seen and learned because of the environment that they might have grown up in. And that's why when they grow up in a healthier environment, they have a better chance, maybe, because they'll model a different type of behavior. It's also why I use the one word as education. You know, trying to educate this next generation of young men and boys to think differently about relationships and about masculinity and about their role in society. I think I've thought about this a lot, and Malcolm Ashley and I talked about it the last time we were together, about that, how difficult it is for a lot of young men and boys to deal with the potential loss of intimacy after they've been in an intimate relationship. and the idea that that person may, in the future, be intimate with someone else. And they just were struggling with the coping skills. And I think it comes back to, being in that box,
Thank you. Yep, and I can take that one. Okay, so different question. What strategies are you currently using to engage men and boys into gender-based violence reduction and prevention? Some strategies. Some folks wanna
My
know.
current strategy is to make documentary films that speaks to these issues and to have them seen by as many people around the world as humanly possible.
Right? That's right.
So at Northeastern, I've tried to use my involvement with Jane Doe and White Ribbon Day to continue to have a dialogue with our student athletes. We've had a number of events on campus where we've partnered with other organizations on campus to talk about the issues around masculinity and about gender roles and gender violence. We've put up the White Ribbon Day flags that you saw out front here when you registered. We have one of those in every athletics venue at Northeastern so that people know where we stand and what our values are. So we've tried to bring all this back to a set of values and our expectations for how we're going to work together and live together at Northeastern.
Great example. One last question, and I think this one is really, really important, especially for those of us, right, as advocates in the movement. Why is it such a common expectation for survivors to have to expose their stories and to come forward and potentially be re-traumatized in order to advocate for change? Why is that always the thing that sparks change? It can be empowering for some survivors, but not for all. And I would add to this question, then what's men's role to make sure that it isn't always off of survivors' backs that change happens?
Well, I'll just talk about the second part of it, and that's why I'm here today. That's why I've been doing the work for 15 years. It's not a woman's issue. It's not a woman's issue. It's a societal issue. And we're not going to solve this epidemic if the men are not going to see themselves as part of the solution.
Right.
So that's as simple as I can make it from the standpoint of men's role. Educate others, as Craig said, bring more people into the movement. Live your life as an example for others. Don't be afraid to challenge people when their language or expectations don't meet the expectations that you think are going to contribute to a healthy environment. And so that second part of it is important for me. Why it has to be the women that come forward? Many things that happen in terms of social change come because people are shocked into action. And, we have to be willing to look in the mirror. And as hard as it is for the victims, if not for their stories, we wouldn't have had the change that we've had in the progress that we've made. And that's why we have to salute them and respect them and appreciate them as much as we do.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, that question really reminds me of the questions that many black people and people of color ask around racism, right? Why is it that, black people and people of color have to always be on the vanguard of, any sort of social change and addressing systemic or institutional racism in this country? And so the same question can be asked, about this issue. So I believe that it's incumbent upon the people who have power and influence and who are the ones who are committing the most harm to actually step up and to take ownership, not ownership in a way that, marginalizes the people who are being oppressed, but to take ownership in terms of accountability, right? And saying this is something that we need to address collectively, and we're going to hold each other accountable, right? Because this is our work that needs to be done, and we have to do more heavy lifting. But most people are not going to volunteer to do that work, right? you have to be challenged, you have to be pushed, you have to be prodded, and you have to be shown why this is going to help you become a better person, a fuller person, a more holistic individual. And I think redefining or reimagining manhood makes us healthier beings. So in that way, it does serve our best interests to change, because we may live longer, better, more loving, just better lives. So that's why we have to do this work.
There you go. That's impressive.
Well, I'll just add a thought that, listening to the voice of survivors has been so critical to progress, and that it is, there's a challenge I heard in that question about the challenge of the re-traumatization. Why do we have to keep doing that? There are more stories. And I would love us to lead a process of storytelling on the other side of the equation. You asked an earlier question about what's going on with this offender. Why is that going on there? Well, there's a story there. And that's men's work. At least part of it is, hear those stories. Figure that out. Hear those stories. Be real. Get in there. Hear those stories. There's two sides of the problem about why one would do this to someone else. And someone says, well, I don't have my feelings. I'm being flailing about. I just losing, these kind of, I'm scared. What am I, I'm losing something. There's also entitlement. I get to do this. It's my role. These are two different things. They're not the same thing. Teaching a guy to be better with his feelings may not stop him from being abusive, necessarily, right? Because there's structural violence, what you teach police to do. It's a strategy to get what I want. So there's a big piece in there. So I want to hear the storytelling process move forward.
Absolutely. Good point. Good point. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Please
thank
don't
you.
leave so we can take a picture. But besides that, again, thank you so much to the panelists. Can we please give them a round of applause again? And to our moderator, thanks, Isa.